Welcome back, everybody. It's the 4 o'clock hour, Business Monday. I'm Josh Fenton here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. This is the money man, Gary Sasse. Cha-ching! It reeks of economic growth when he is in the place. Record stock market, low unemployment. It is a Gary Sasse kind of economy.
It's a mirage.
It is a mirage, he says.
Just joking.
This economy is booming by every measure. Is this carry Gina Raimondo to victory? Does it carry Donald Trump to re-election? What are all the implications of this miraculous economy? Let's forget the federal deficit. We won't worry about that right now. We can always push that off and deal with that later, right? Isn't that the mantra? Is this economy so good that if you're an incumbent, you can't lose?
Well, you have to work at it to lose. The economy is strong. Unemployment is at a record low. The stock market's at a record high. The tax cuts that some of my Democrat friends criticized seems to be, working and encouraging investment. But you also have to recognize that they're cycles.
Yeah.
And just as a cycle goes up, a cycle can go down. And one of the concerns I have more about Rhode Island than nationally is that things are good here.
Yeah.
Employment is high, unemployment is low. Things on the job front seem to be pretty stable. But I think we have to be concerned whether it's masking what some of the structural problems are. And there seems to be, in this campaign, less discussion of what some of the long-term issues are and how we have to address those long-term issues. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The last time the Revenue Estimating Committee met in November, the economists, outside economists, projected that our average annual rate of employment growth between now and 2022 would be under 0.5%.
Yeah.
Now the Revenue Estimating Conference is meeting again in about a month, so we'll see if that changes. But if you look back and you step back and you look at numbers over a long period of time, there was a Georgetown study that over the last 25 years, Rhode Island lost the largest number of good-paying blue-collar jobs, being defined as jobs paying more than $45,000. Since 2007, we've had the largest loss in retail employment. The demographics are of a concern. Because we're not growing population. We're old and we're not growing the population, fast enough. And there's been an out-migration of people, upper middle income people, and an in-migration of lower income, immigrants. Our educational attainment levels are high. So, for example, when they talk about the growth in the business service sector and the finance sector, that's true. We are experiencing growth, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on that growth. But these are back office jobs, they're middle jobs, they're not the high income jobs. And so those factors, can come to the forefront, and in 2 or 3 years as the cycle moves, we could be back in the soup again, and none of the candidates seem to be addressing that. And there are a couple of indicators just on how we're doing during this economic boom. And you always have to compare yourself to something. A rising tide lifts all ships, but some ships rise higher and some ships lower. And so I looked at employment growth between July of 15 and July of 18 over a 3-year period, and we did good. Rhode Island's employment grew by 3.7%. It was close to 20,000 jobs. Yeah. But Massachusetts, it was 4.9%. It was 172,000 jobs. And in the country, there was 5% growth. So the standard of growth, national average, the standard of growth for our neighbor state is 5%, and we're under 4%. Same with GDP. If you look, I looked just quickly. This doesn't tell the entire story, but GDP growth in the first quarter of 18, we were about 1.5%. National GDP was growing a little over 3%, 3 to 3.5%. So yeah, we're doing fine, but our growth is lagging. We've made tremendous progress in the state in bringing down the unemployment rate. But the truth of the matter is we still have the ranked 30th in the percentage of people that are unemployed.
Well, even just last month, Rhode Island down 2,400 jobs. Anecdotal, Massachusetts up 6,100 jobs.
Yeah, and 1 month doesn't make a trend, but the 3 years that I looked at in employment between July of 15 and July of 18, shows that the economic cycle has been good. Governor's right. We have grown jobs, probably about 20,000 jobs since she has been in office. But that rate of growth compared to what's happening nationally and compared to what's happening in Massachusetts pales.
Right.
And so those things have to be of concern. So yeah, things are good right now. I don't think, certainly things are not going to change in the next 6 weeks before an election. But as you get into the governor's second term or Fung's first term, whatever the case may be, there are structural issues that could turn this thing around very quickly.
Nick Mattiello, Speaker of the House, was on last Tuesday with me, and he was tempered in the analysis of Rhode Island's economic condition. He said, hey, listen, we're going to start the year again with a $200 million deficit. He said, all is not rosy. We've still got a spending problem. He was cautious about expanding the Promise program, free college education, which is now being offered at CCRI. I thought, for a guy running for re-election, I thought he was very moderate in how he portrays what the state of Rhode Island's economy is.
Well, and I applaud him for that. He's right. I wish he had been as moderate when he passed this budget, because this is a bad budget by any stretch of imagination. So we have an opening surplus this year of about $45 million.
Right.
But we had budgeted 32 of it to balance the budget. So we have, in effect, a structural deficit in the budget.
I think we're going to see a much bigger hit in the delay in the sports betting, missing the key segment of the entire sports betting year by just those 6 weeks being late. Could cost the state $5 million.
And as usual, we have no room for error. So,
Right.
so this year, the state budget office is projecting a deficit for the fiscal year starting in July, fiscal 20, of $158 million that the governor has to close before she submits her budget. Well, that's about 3 or 4% of revenue, and so you have no room for error when you do that. And yet, knowing, and if you look in the out years, the fact is that spending, particularly for Medicaid, for education, and to fund the car tax cut and others, spending is growing about 4%, 3.5%, 4%. Revenues are growing under 2%, and so when you hit the 2023. The projected deficit, the number doesn't matter as the percent of revenue it is. We can have a projected deficit of a 5.5% of revenue. That's a problem. So no room for errors. And this conversation that we had earlier of what would happen with the economy. Economy is going strong right now. Just think if the economy wasn't growing strong, what these numbers would look like. Now, I'm a little bit optimistic. I think when the Revenue Estimating Committee meets, we're going to see some strong consumption numbers. I'm not sure about
because you've gotten me pretty depressed over the last 10 minutes.
Well,
all this gloom and doom.
Well, the economics is a dismal science. You might as well practice it. But no. I think it's better to have this kind of conversation. And I hope it's wrong, but no one else. The key point here is that we're not on a picnic. There's still a lot of tough work to be done. And we have to have this kind of conversation.
Let me ask you a question. Why has no one, including Governor Raimondo, offered a big vision for the next 4 years? Why is taking advantage of a lot of positive things, low unemployment, et cetera, and talk about the opportunity to reinvent Rhode Island? And I'm not saying that we need a greenhouse compact, the famous and wildly rejected proposal by Ira Magaziner and sponsored by then Fleet Bank President Terry Murray and Governor Garrahy in the 70s.
I was on the other side of that issue. Remember that?
But that was a big idea.
It was a good idea.
But right now we seem to be there's no one talking about ideas.
Well, there are two ways to look at it. You can come out with a big idea and a big strategy, and never get there, or you can have a series of tactical, what I would call relatively small wins, and get there. And in government, sometimes a small win strategy is a good strategy, but the point is that no one's talking about, what are important small wins. And I have thought about this. So, the kinds of things I think the governor ought to be talking about in terms of wins to get to where you want to go is, in the cabinet, create a Department of Information and Innovation. And obvious reasons to do it. We know our technology and state government has had problems. We know about the UHIP problem. Because
Across the board. I mean,
Yeah.
it's somewhere between morbid and barely functional.
So if the governor wants to get on top of that, you create this cabinet agency, and if it does information and innovation, there are two advantages. One, the governor has a top department with the resources to deal with the information thing on delivery of state services. And if Rhode Island is going to be a center of innovation, then government has to show that it also can innovate. So that's an important thing to do. I think Commerce Rhode Island is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on tax incentives. No one knows. There's probably some good ones. I happen to think the qualified job credit is a good idea. I think the Wave Makers program, which is a small program to help college students, is a good idea.
And retain people here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Build Rhode Island is the right program or not, but get in there and in 5 or 6 months do a mega audit. Find out what works and put more into it, and what doesn't work, get rid of it. But no one wants to have that conversation. They get very defensive. The biggest tax problem the state faces, business faces, is the property tax. If you just did a simple thing over 10 years, phased out the tax on tangible property, that helps every small business in the state, and it's particularly important in urban areas where the commercial tax is pretty.
So if I'm running against Gina Raimondo, why aren't I talking about big ideas? Her biggest idea right now, based on where the campaign's met to date, is the $250 million general obligation bond to improve schools. And then a second one coming at some point in the future, $500 million. Fall River just approved funding and is moving forward with redoing Durfee High School. The bill on that alone, that one high school, is right now budgeted to be $300 million, and of course it will go over that. We're talking about pennies to deal with problems that are in the billions.
Well, but that's a good question, and one of the weaknesses of the fund campaign is it's perfectly legitimate, and it's really important part of campaigning to point out the weaknesses and the failures of your opponent. That goes with the territory, but that only gets you so far. Then you have to point out, okay, we can do better, and this is how we can do better.
Right.
Now, I don't think it necessarily has to be the grand strategy, but the kinds of things that I talked about of innovation.
But like Donald Trump or dislike Donald Trump, he's about big ideas, right? He's about throwing the ball down the field. It's about a big tax reform. It's about a big resetting of our trade agreements across the world. And if we have to have a little battle with China, maybe in the long run it's worth it to be able to protect technology that the Chinese have been ripping off for decades.
Everybody agrees that we have to take on China, but you have to have policy based on fact. And the president, he can have great ideas, but he didn't go.
I'm not arguing for the merits of them, but from the strategy standpoint, they're big.
But let's talk about big ideas here, because we've done big things.
Alan Fung, no big idea.
Well, we've done big things here. Take tax policy, for example.
Okay.
Over the last decade.
Is car tax a big?
No, it's a nice thing to do. But let me tell you what the big ideas were, and I chaired this tax study committee.
I mean, listen, for guys like you, the money man, who have Rolls Royces and Bentleys and all the rest, the car tax is
okay. It's fine.
It's got to be.
There's nothing wrong with it, but it's a good idea. But the big ideas that were done, from Kachuri administration forward. Well, the high marginal rate, the 11% marginal rate, was killing us. We knocked the marginal rate down to under 6%. We broadened the tax base.
Right.
The high corporate tax was killing us. We knocked that down to be very competitive. We broadened the definition of what the corporate tax base is. We've gotten rid of the sales tax on energy. Those were so when you put that together, you could say, well, we're
more competitive.
Yes, so that was a strategic accomplishment. Our tax structure is more competitive. We've done squat on the property tax, and I would argue, this is a very unpopular political argument, but I would argue that if we got rid of the tangible tax on property, that might do more to help jobs in the economy than the car tax. It would not get to the middle class and the low middle class as quickly, so there was an equity benefit in the car tax versus what I'm talking about. But when you step back and you look at what's been done, it's easy to criticize and say, no, we haven't done one big thing. We've done a big thing. We have a very different tax structure today than we had 7, 8 years ago. One thing I think the Raimondo administration has done well is the Real Jobs program. For now we have a program of jobs that is much more tied to industry need than anything we've had before. Those are very substantive changes. And so it's really important to take, pause, take a deep breath, and say, well, while no one's proposing a big strategy, where were we and where have we come to? And I could point out that we've made some big steps in a number of places. Where we haven't made big steps is we haven't fixed up our fiscal situation. It's no better today than it was after when we came out of the recession. In information and innovation, we're not doing better on that. The biggest area, though, that we're not doing better on, which could be a significant thing where I would agree with you that we need a big strategy, is education. We have no strategic direction on education. I've written about a need for a student bill of rights. Our education.
That was a good piece.
Yeah, I hope you rerun it.
Yeah, you want us to rerun that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we'll rerun that.
I think it's more relevant today.
It is.
So you say, okay, let's figure out where the big strategy is. If you ask me, and 10 other people might have 11 different ideas on what to do, my big strategic issue would be 2. Education first, and because we've made progress in other places. The second, would be health, because that's going to be a growth industry, and we're going through some radical changes. So but you have to take manageable bites. So we can talk about a big strategy for education. We can talk about a big strategy for health. That's fine, but recognize some of the other progress that we've made.
Speaker Mattiello said that he is the firewall in many ways to protect the pro-business agenda in the state of Rhode Island. Him being speaker, your friends over at the New York-owned tree killers over there at the Providence Journal dismissed Steve Frias as what they call him, Penny Annie Challenger, or some other insult. It might be the most interesting race in the state of Rhode Island. District 15 again, Steve Frias versus Nick Mattiello. Is it that important a race that Nick Mattiello needs to come back in order to protect the Republic and protect the economy? Or is Steve Frias the kind of new ideas, new thoughts, new energy that you need up at the General Assembly to push things forward?
Well, you can have both. I think what the Journal was saying about the speaker, and it was no surprise at their editorial on Sunday, is they believe he's done what you said, that he's been the bastion of...
I think it was also in response to discussions of them losing their legal notices to the tune of about $700,000.
That's a cynical view. I'm not going to get there. But, so they think he's been the stalwart of economic development. And indeed he has. He's really given up a lot of legislative prerogatives to the administration. The oversight is not...
He said he gave him the toolkit.
He certainly gave him the toolkit. But the Journal also points out certain of his limitations on PORSOX, on line item veto. There have been a lot of scandals. I could go through Gallison, Montanaro, Marshall. There's concerns about the Speaker's power. People in his own caucus are stepping away because they don't feel that they're being heard. So there's nothing that says you can't be a strong advocate for economic development and have that as your priority and focus, and on the same time not concentrate so much power in the speakership, because what Frias argues is that we've concentrated too much power in the speakership, and not that Mattiello hasn't done some things right, but overall he's exercised poor judgment. Mattiello argues that the things he's exercised judgment on are important to working people and important to business. My opinion is you can have good government. You can run the government openly and transparently and accountably.
Steve Frias or Nick Mattiello?
Going to be close. I'm not calling that one.
Who do you want?
I'm a Republican.
And you don't have $700,000 of legal notices revenue riding on it.
You're a cynic. I'm not going there.
Let's go to Washington the last few minutes. Supreme Court nominee Kavanaugh seems to hit another speed bump over the weekend with the New Yorker, Ronan Farrow, coming out identifying a woman at Yale who alleges that he sexually harassed her. Is he done? Is he near done? Or is the reality that the votes are on the committee and the votes are on the floor, and the Republicans are going to approve him, and he's going to be the next Supreme Court nominee?
No, I think the votes are there, but I think at the same time he has to defend himself and make the case that some of these accusations against him are without merit. So it's wait and see. I think he, whether it's fair or not, because one is presumed innocent until proven guilty. In this case, he has to prove he's not guilty, and he'll have to do a good job at that. So let's see what happens. Some of this, some of the surrounding facts about things that happened 35 and 40 years ago. The New Yorker article on the supposed or purported incident at Yale, and what was involved in having the person reconstruct a memory, just gets you to scratch your head, and why these things are coming out now. What was the FBI doing in 6 inquiries? Why wasn't the FBI given that information at the appropriate time? Why didn't the Senate bring that information up in July? It's just, I don't want to be a cynic, because you have to, give any woman the right to be heard on these issues. We have it for too long a period of time. So let's see if he can defend himself. Still very much ball game.
Last issue, we're seeing a campaign being defined at the highest level in the governor's race by little chits here and little chits there. Alan Fung went to the inauguration and wore a Trump hat. The governor didn't do this. Fung didn't run the ice skating rink well. I mean, is this really what Rhode Islanders are looking for in the direction for the next 4 years?
We spoke about that for a long time. We need a strategy on education. We need somebody, to talk about the things I did about restructuring the cabinet, a student's bill of rights, mega order to
come. But is the narrative just
narrative? It's I don't know, well, all politics are local. Negative campaigning gets results. So when you see all this petty stuff, it's really a result of this negative campaigning. It has its place, but it's drowning out discussion of policy. But that's the biggest problem of this whole Trump dynamic. Every day he drowns out a conversation about substance and policy. You mentioned China earlier. I like a good debate. I like a clear policy on getting even with China and balancing, having fair trade policy with them. But one day Xi's his friend, one day he's not. You can't have a continuity, a predictability of going forward, and it's coloring our political system at the federal level, and it's kind of peeling its way down to the state level. But there's always been, politics is local, as I said, and it's always been I gotcha kinds of moments. But I think the candidate that rises above the I gotcha moment, should do better. But when you look at the facts, the guy that has the best negative campaign is in the best position. It's unfortunate.
Just to close, Neil Steinberg came on and talked about the importance of education. Speaker Mattiello talked about the importance of education. You've come on and talked about the importance of education. 3 significant influencers, decision makers. Is that really where the agenda is going to go in Rhode Island for the next 5 to 10 years, that we realize we cannot compete with states like Massachusetts, who have made an absolute commitment to it, Republican or Democrat, without improving our K through 12 education?
Well, we've done that. So I chaired a commission for Bruce Summit in 1991, All Kids Agenda.
Yep.
And we put out, I'm proud of this, before Massachusetts came out with their program, a year before we had a very similar program, they started to implement it. And the first time they got pressure from a teachers union or from a parent or from a school district that didn't want the mandate, the legislature changed their mind. Deborah Gist did a good job in focusing on high performance. The first time a parent in Barrington felt her kid wasn't being treated fair.
They ran her out of town.
Okay, so what the difference between Massachusetts and Rhode Island is not that Massachusetts had better ideas, because we all had the same ideas. It wasn't reinventing the wheel. There were just so many things that you could do. They stayed the course. Bulger, the Speaker of the House, not the other one. Finneran, Governor Weld, both Democrat and Republicans, they made some course corrections. If you can't take politics out of politics totally, but they basically stayed the course, and this is what the results are. And they started in 1993, so 15 years later, or 20 years later, you see the progress. We started out in 91, we started out in late 90s, we started out with Kacheri, with Gist, and we did the right things. You can argue we should have done something else, but you could not argue that we weren't doing the right things. We didn't stay the course. We changed our testing regimen every time somebody gets upset. We changed our method of performance. We argue about evergreen contracts. And that's why I think the thing I'd like you to republish, the Student Bill of Rights,
We will.
you really puts out, that somebody that's running for governor, somebody that's running for legislature, want to put the students first. It's not the adults, it's not the teachers, it's not the school administrators, it's the kids, and if you don't give them a Bill of Rights, you have a problem. Now, Rhode Island also is a state that does not have a constitutional guarantee to have access to an adequate education. And for a long time, we in the School Committee Association, we being the Hassenfeld Institute and others, have been talking about a constitutional amendment to clarify the provision, to say that education is an enforceable right. We can't even get to first base on that.
Gary Sasse, as always, thank you so much. Always insightful, and appreciate you taking all the time. We have ignored talking about football, your pain, my pain, and all of Patriot Nation pain after losing to the Detroit Lions. It's hard to even utter the words. Welcome back, Rod Rust and Hugh Millen, coaching quarterback.
It's one
of the
game.
New England
It's
Patriots.
one game. One
No, it was bad.
It was
bad. Gary.
Belichick will fix it. Genius.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate you spending the time here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It has been a busy day with a lot of interesting guests on a lot of different fronts. Tomorrow, at 3 o'clock, I've got Central Falls Mayor James Diosa in at 3, and Kate Nagel's got a jam-packed hour at 4 o'clock. Thanks everybody. We'll see you